If that's okay with you, I'd like to call on the panelists to join me here on the side. The first one I'm calling kind of remotely, Pia Andrews, who will join us by video. She comes from Australia and is the Executive Director for Digital Government Policy and Innovation in the Department of Finance in the Government of New South Wales. She'll be connected on video. Greetings, Pia. Can you hear us and see us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for being with us. And in a way, you are overshadowing the panel, so you'll be giving the introductory words to frame what we are doing here. But I will
try to wield this power very responsibly.
Lovely. Thank you, Pia. I'd also like to call on Alexandre Pólvora, who is a policy analyst in the EU Policy Lab of the European Commission. Alexandre, you're right there. Please join us. Angela Hanson, who is the innovation lead of the OECD-Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. Angela, also right here. Oh, that's lovely, you're all near the podium. Umut, Berker, Sevilmis, specialist and trainer in the Nilüfer Municipality in Bursa in Turkey. Sorry? Ah, yeah, great. Greetings, Umut. Please join us. And Nino, who I have met just a second ago, right here, Nino Gvinazzo, who is a data analyst in the Secretariat of the State Commission on Migration with the government of Georgia. And Stephen Coulson, on my left here, who is head of the Sustainable Initiatives Office in the European Space Agency, ESA. The way we would like to do this panel discussion is by giving each of our panelists about 5 to 7 minutes or so to respond to questions, but also to introduce their work, give us a sense of how evidence-based and experimental-based approaches influence their work, what they make of it. So it will take us roughly 50 minutes in total, and then we'll hopefully have enough time in between. Should there be questions of understanding, key issues that you really can't see waiting before they're being addressed, give me a sign that is beyond raising an eyebrow. Give me a full hand, because the room is far too big for me to really go to the microscopic levels. So without further ado, yeah, let me come to you, since you are really framing the discussion. Can we start at a kind of big picture level? What does that...
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me remotely. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. I guess I want to start with one big picture idea, which is...
Before you start, let me frame a question so that it doesn't, how should I say, go directly into the open space that is between Australia and ourselves here in Istanbul. How do you see this tension that we have been discussing here quite a bit between evidence-based approaches and experimental-based policy making from your perspective, both in your own work, but also more globally?
For sure. Thank you for that. I think that the comment you made before, that it's that the idea that they are in conflict with each other is not necessarily true. I think that that's a true statement. I think that both approaches are actually needed. But the key thing is that we're seeing a paradigm shift. We're seeing a massive shift away from being kings in castles to being a node in a network, a shift in governments around the world from being in control to being enablers of others, to being a platform, a social and economic platform upon which people can thrive. So we have this issue where evidence-based approaches have been great at identifying a problem, have been great at identifying that there is something needing to be done. But if you only apply evidence-based approaches, you can accidentally reinvent the past with shiny new things, because you get a normative outcome from existing data and from predictions based on existing data only, do nothing else. So the idea of experimentation-based approaches, ideally co-designed with communities, equitably co-designed with communities, create more sustainable and effective solutions in many of the cases that I've been involved in. So in my mind, you actually need both. I think that a lot of people have sort of confused the notion that that one or the other is ideal. We actually need both. The measurement often enough ends up being limited to functions. We've seen this disconnect in government between policy, legislation and implementation. And the problem is that they get evidence-based policy, but then the implementation of extra policy, zero chance of your policy intent being met, or very close to zero in any case. So actually having a reform, a transformation to how we apply, how we approach policy in the first place, bringing system design thinking, bringing experimentation-based approaches, having the people who do the implementation in the same room as the policymakers, the data people, as the legislative drafters, give you a chance to rapidly test, rapidly implement, rapidly explore the implementation of your policy as has the intended consequences in a safe environment, in a test environment, and then even making that available publicly gives a chance for other consumers of your policy to feed into that approach as well. So for me, part of this is about the combination of evidence-based and experimentation-based. Part of it is the necessary shift from control to enablement, being a node in a network. But part of it is also about open government. Open government is a necessary pillar of digital transformation of governments, of digital transformation of services right through to policy and legislation and regulation. And system thinking, not just design, not just service design, but system design and speculative design skills also give us some new tools and some new skills and opportunities to rethink all of it. The reason this is important is because if we don't take the time to actually design a better future, we will reinvent the past with shiny new things. And we need to always remember that we can reinvent, can actually design something better, fundamentally better, not just slightly better, not just a bit of that. Let me give you some examples. I'll give you three very quick ones. The first one is we were looking at the notion of legislation as code, or digital transformation as it applies to legislation. We found that when we had the policy, legislative drafters, and the and developers and technologists and designers in the room together, we got far better outcomes, far more effective implementation, and we could test that implementation very quickly within weeks, not months or years. So the actual time to implement and the time to see the impact of that, those original policy intents became very quick. In Taiwan, I think there's a fabulous case study where Uber did their usual approach of trying to their business model through the back door. And the Taiwanese government, the digital minister, Audrey Tang, who is a remarkable human, used a methodology to engage with the community on their sentiment, on their value systems, on their values around Uber, and was able to say, well, we've polled, tens of thousands of people using AI. So this is, again, civic deliberation approaches to policy and legislation. We've identified the values of our community and don't mind if you're able to participate in this legislative drafting. This will frame your business model. So we encourage you, but we do it in the open. And by working in the open, engaging public collaboration, and most importantly, taking a public values management approach rather than the traditional new public management approach, they were able to draft legislation that allowed a new business model that really reflects the values of the community there. Again, this is where you bring experimentation-based approach to the implementation of these ideas, done in real time, done openly, and done in new methodologies. There's a project in the New South Wales government called Their Future. Basically, they identified through evidence-based policy and through evidence-based approaches that there was exponential growth in the number of children going into protective services, which is obviously a terrible thing. And what they identified was that all the same old approaches to try to solve the problem were not working. So they actually engaged in experimentation-based policy in co-design with Aboriginal and Indigenous non-profits, with communities that were affected and elders in those communities, and came up with small, rapid prototyping of policy changes that were able to then actually demonstrate genuine better outcomes, better social outcomes for communities, for children and for their families. The final quick example I'll give is in New Zealand, when I was working there most recently. We actually took all the it's about its social and technology trends, and indeed democratic trends, and we extrapolated out using speculative design to create a 50-year optimistic future. From that, we could, and we did it collaboratively. We encouraged lots of different communities to create their 50-year future, again, designing a better future based on values and evidence, but also not being limited to the current problem that is put. The value of this, first of all, lifted everyone's eyes to the horizons, that you can start to actually genuinely look at what could happen rather than just what has happened. But it also gave us a chance to reverse engineer necessary infrastructure, policies, services, and I think very importantly, the role of public sectors, the role of government in a digital society, in a digital economy, in a way that hasn't been thought of before, which then again enables a combination of evidence-based and experimentation-based approaches to moving forward. I'll just make one last point. I think that, so experimentation-based is not just about experimentation, it's about collaboration, design thinking, and demonstrating and open government, working in an open way. Because if we want people to trust our policies, our services, our legislation, our role in society, then we need to make sure that everything we do is ethical, accountable, and able to be trusted. Rather than asking for trust, we should be trustworthy, which means we need to fundamentally change our approaches right back to how we do policy. If people don't feel they have a role to play in the policy settings that define their life, then they will further disengage and further distrust our public sectors at a point in time where it is most important that we can do our role so that we can provide an exponential response to the exponential complexity and change that is facing our communities every day. I think that's okay for some framing. Hopefully that will be useful.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Pia. And thanks also for giving us quite a number of concrete examples of how you see this applied in your context back home and more generally. I just perhaps like to pick up on your last point, which is a little bit about what do we understand under experimentation-based policy making. I think it's important, at least for me, to always bear in mind that it's not just about a micro project somewhere. It's about open government. It's about systems thinking. It's about different ways of learning and different ways of prototyping. So the definition that sits behind it, I think we always need to bear in mind when we try and to address different tensions that exist between approaches. So thank you very much, Pia. I'll come to the panel now, and I hope we can stay you as the guardian angel, if you wish, above the panel. I hope the connection allows us to keep you connected, and then also to be part of the question and answers and discussion round that we will have rather soon. Great, thanks very much, Pia.